9-year-old Angie Housman went missing from her bus stop and was found 9 days later in the woods of St. Charles County. Investigators say she was sexually assaulted, tortured, and left alive to die in the snow.
There's more like him out there. He's not the only one. So no, we'll never have closure. As long as monsters out there like that, never have closure, ever.
St. Anne, Missouri was a peaceful suburb where parents felt safe letting their kids walk home from school. But on November 18th, 1993, that innocence was shattered when 9-year-old Angie Housman never made it home from her bus stop. Her disappearance and the horrific details that followed rocked this tight-knit community to its core and left an unfillable void in her family's lives. Welcome to Tried and True Crime, where we cover shocking cases from around the world. Today, we're looking at the utterly devastating murder of Angie Housman, a fourth grader whose life was senselessly cut short by an act of depravity. St. Anne is a small suburban town in Missouri, located just northwest of St. Louis. With a population of around 13,000, it's the kind of place where neighbors wave to each other and kids play freely in the streets. Up until 1993, major crime was virtually unheard of here. This peaceful community believed itself to be far removed from the hurt and violence of the bigger cities nearby. But all that changed after Angie's disappearance. Angie Housman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri, to her mother Diana and stepfather Ron Bone. The family was close-knit and shared a strong bond. Angie was a fourth grader at Butter Elementary School and the only child of her parents at the time. Known for her sweet demeanor and zest for life, Angie was a social butterfly who loved making new friends. At just 9 years old, her whole life was still ahead of her. November 18th, 1993 started off as a perfectly ordinary day for 9-year-old Angie Housman. She attended her classes as usual, eagerly anticipating the final bell so she could head home for the day. When the final bell rang, she joined the stream of kids excitedly pouring out of the building and onto the buses lined up to take them back to their neighborhoods. Angie was a creature of routine. She would get dropped off at the same bus stop on St. Anne Street, just 8 houses away from where she lived. It was a very short walk from the bus stop through quiet, tree-lined streets to reunite with her mom and stepdad. Most days, 2 parents from the area would keep a watchful eye on the kids, making sure they arrived home safely. 2 days earlier, one of them had even complained to the police about a strange man wandering about. But on this particular day, those parent volunteers weren't there. Angie stepped off that yellow school bus with her friends, same as always. Several of them would later recount being able to see Angie until she passed the 4th house along the route. And then, in what seemed like the blink of an eye, Angie Housman simply vanished without a trace. Half an hour went by, and there was no sign of Angie returning home, failing to show up at that expected time she always kept like clockwork. Naturally, concern started creeping in for Diana and Ron. They wondered if she had just stopped to chat with friends or neighbors along the way, as her outgoing, talkative nature would suggest. But as minutes painfully ticked by, it became clear that something was very, very wrong. Angie's parents sprang into action, scouring the streets and calling on neighbors to assist in the search. When those efforts failed to turn up any clues as to Angie's whereabouts, they had no choice but to alert the authorities. From that point on, a nightmare scenario of dread, terror, and uncertainty would unfold over the next 9 agonizing days for the Housman Bone family. Despite the best efforts of the St. Anne police, who launched an extensive investigation with exhaustive searches and interviews, no one knew what had happened to Angie after she left that bus stop. It was as if she had utterly disappeared into thin air. On November 27th, 9 days after her disappearance, Angie's battered and frozen body was discovered by a deer hunter in the remote woods of the Bush Wildlife area. The unspeakable crime scene told a grim story of torture and suffering inflicted on this innocent child. Angie's nude body was found chained to a tree, her tiny wrists bound with handcuffs. Her face was cruelly wrapped in duct tape, with only her nose left exposed to breathe through. Signs of sexual assault were present on her frail body that had endured vicious beatings. Most horrifically, the medical examiner determined that while Angie had endured unimaginable physical and mental anguish, the ultimate cause of her death was in fact hypothermia from being left out in the cold to die. After being starved for over a week and having her clothes removed, her little body simply could not withstand the freezing November temperatures of rural Missouri. An agonizing death after being subjected to every parent's worst nightmare. That's what this little girl suffered at the hands of a remorseless monster. With such a baffling and high-profile case, you can imagine the immense pressure on investigators to turn over every possible stone and pursue any potential lead, no matter how unlikely or far-fetched it may have seemed. The disappearance of 9-year-old Angie Housman set off a massive multi-agency response, with the St. Anne Police working tirelessly alongside the St. Louis Major Case Squad and even the FBI. In those first crucial days, one of the only clues they had to go on was an eyewitness account from just 48 hours prior to Angie's abduction. A parent had called authorities to report seeing a strange man lingering around the very same area where kids were getting on and off the school bus. The witness was able to provide a general description of the suspect as a bearded individual wearing a long coat and driving an older model blue car. While this was hardly a lead, authorities launched an intense manhunt and door-to-door canvassing in hopes of identifying this shady figure. Perhaps he was their only tangible suspect in a case that was starting to look like a kidnapping. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, this bizarre loiterer never surfaced again as a solid lead. As the search efforts expanded over a wider radius, other strange and chilling clues began trickling in from the public. Teachers came forward to recount a disturbing conversation they had with Angie herself in the days just preceding her disappearance. The bright young girl had made an offhand comment about having plans to go to the countryside with an older male relative she referred to as her uncle. Of course, when Angie's family was questioned, they dismissed this alleged uncle as being entirely fictitious. This opened up an even more unsettling possibility that Angie may have been groomed or lured into a trap set by a predator. Despite a flurry of new tips and potential witness statements, no definitive link could be established. As the weeks dragged into months with no substantive suspect or motive surfacing, the case grew colder by the day. Hardened criminals who seemed to fit the profile of Angie's abductor, convicted pedophiles and child molesters in the area, such as Gary Stuffle Bean, and even serial killers like Bryant Squire, were all thoroughly investigated. However, they were ruled out one by one as their evidence and alibis disqualified them. The trail was cold, and hopes of finding justice for Angie dwindled further with each dead-end lead. It seemed like the shocking case that rocked the St. Louis area would never be solved. That is, until cutting-edge developments in DNA testing led to a major breakthrough over 25 years later. In 2018, advanced forensic methods matched a genetic profile to the crime, identifying 63-year-old Earl Webster Cox, a former U.S. Air Force staff member and convicted child sexual predator. Cox's criminal history revealed a long pattern of targeting and exploiting young victims. In 1982, he was dishonorably discharged from the military and imprisoned for 8 years after being court-martialed for sexually abusing children he babysat while stationed in Germany. Upon release and relocation to Missouri in the early 1990s, his depraved urges only intensified. Just 2 days before Angie's abduction in November 1993, Cox's car broke down in the very St. Anne neighborhood that the 9-year-old lived in. Earl claimed he was on his way to his sister's house. While he was inspecting his car, Angie happened to walk by. Earl asked if she was hungry, and she said yes. They went to Burger King together, and afterward, he took her to his place. After the incident, Cox remained in St. Louis until 1995 before relocating to Colorado, where he initiated a child sex ring. He was arrested in 2002 after an FBI agent posing as a teenager reached out to him. Cox sent money for a train ticket to Colorado, but the agent arrested him at the restaurant where they planned to meet. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, the now 63-year-old Earl Cox confessed to the murder of Angie Housman after over 2 decades of clinging to silence. To avoid execution, he confessed to tricking the girl into his car by promising food, then locking her up for over a week. Cox revealed to prosecutors how he kept Angie's captivity hidden from his own live-in girlfriend at that time, torturing and sexually assaulting the 9-year-old behind closed doors. In a final act of cruelty, he left her naked, handcuffed body chained to a tree to suffer the fatal effects of hypothermia. In a controversial move that outraged Angie's family, the St. Charles County prosecutor ultimately struck a plea deal that took the death penalty off the table in exchange for Cox's full confession. While avoiding a trial, this decision spared Cox from facing execution, but ensured he would be handed a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently imprisoned in Southeast Correctional Center in Charleston, Missouri. The murder of Angie Housman highlights several tough societal truths. It emphasizes the lasting emotional pain and sorrow carried by victims' families. Angie's mother, Diana, passed away without ever knowing who killed her daughter. Angie's murder also draws attention to the severe impact of sexual violence and exploitation of children. Earl Cox, a repeat offender, was given chances outside of prison but continued to offend in some of the worst ways imaginable. Although Cox's arrest brings some closure to Angie's case, it underscores the flaws in the criminal justice system's ability to identify and isolate dangerous child predators before they harm others again. After Angie Housman's tragic murder, the community of St. Anne, Missouri is still struggling to cope with the shattered sense of security and peace. Simple childhood routines like walking home from the school bus are now seen with fear and suspicion. Angie's stepfather, Ron Bone, feels not just grief, but also a deep sense of helplessness for failing to protect his beloved child. In a heartbreaking statement, he expressed how he wished he had encountered Angie's killer instead of her in November 1993. Angie's case shows how quickly innocence can be stolen from both a child and a community. What do you think leads a person to commit such depraved acts? Are they born evil, or does society shape them this way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more disturbing crime stories. Until next time.